Hello everybody, today I am driving yet another Japanese oddity imported by good guy and channel fan Brad. Though on the face of it, this Nissan Skyline 370 GT crossover might seem like the daftest of all of his cars, in a lot of ways I think this could actually be the perfect car for the modern day motorist. Let's see why. So then, what is it that we have here today? I'm sure there are plenty out there for whom the Skyline brand began and ended with that run of fabulous GTRs from the late 80s to the early noughties, the R32, R33 and R34. In fact, the Skyline name has been attached to cars dating back to 1957, when it was used by the Prince Motor Company, who later merged with Nissan. And though I know for most of us it was a badge that was retired when the R34 GTR went out of production, being then replaced by the R35 that lost the Skyline branding, it instead carried on. And this is an example of the 12th generation of the Skyline family, which was first introduced in 2007 and continued on until about 2015. I have to date been able to sample a number of this family, courtesy of Brad, including the 370 Coupe, the 370 Sedan, the 55th anniversary version, and, in case you are wondering, yes, those cars are very close relatives of the 370Z that I'm sure you are a little bit more familiar with. The most unusual of all, though, has to be this, the 370 GT crossover, which is more or less exactly what it says on the tin. So you have this, actually I think, fairly pleasing to the eye body, and below the bonnet, a 3.7 litre V6 naturally aspirated engine, making about 330 horsepower. And as I'm sure a few of you may be wondering, or might have already guessed, yes, there was also an Infiniti version of this car that you're likely more familiar with. In this case, it was the EX37, which later became the QX. In terms of sizing, it's definitely smaller than the ever-popular Qashqai, however, it's also usefully bigger than the Duke, meaning you can get 4 or maybe 5 adults in here with relative ease, and the boot is okay. Like its bigger brother, the FX, on account of the styling and the fact the car is rear-wheel drive by default, the boot floor is a little higher than you would think, and the ceiling a little lower, meaning if you are on the hunt for something that can carry stuff on a frequent basis, this probably isn't going to be the best choice. Although in its defense, we did find out one feature today that's fairly cool, which even Brad didn't know about, and that's that the rear seats can be folded down by a button, which isn't entirely unusual. It just sort of pulls a pin and they go flump. However, there is also a button both in the rear and down here, which will then raise them electrically. Don't think I've seen that on a car before. That's quite cool. Much like the FX that I drove a little while ago, this is actually something of a real pleasant surprise when it comes to the drive. Not only do you have that nice meaty engine up front, but the steering also has a little bit more connection to it than you might expect, a little bit more weighting, got a very sort of sports car-like feel to it. That I did not expect. The car is still wearing its Japanese spec tyres, which are Bridgestone Regnos, however it's now sat on a set of 18-inch and I think rather cool looking BBS wheels. Brad wanted to keep the size and the tyres themselves because he felt if he put anything larger on, it'd likely compromise the ride. And as it is, this strikes a nice balance, I would say, between comfy and sporty. There's perhaps a little more busyness to the ride around town than you might expect, but it's never crashy. The engine then, which is paired with a 7-speed automatic gearbox at junctions, pulls away with ease, and, as we're now on a nice little bit of B-road, let's find out what happens when you want to have fun. This is actually a real, genuine surprise. First off, that engine. I mean, look, I know a few years ago we used to see it's like all the time, but today you'd struggle to get anything nicer than a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbo in a car like this. However, when you get to experience an old school power plant, you realise why people like myself spend so long bleating on about them. You've got torque low down, but then it'll rev keenly all the way to at least 7,500. It's a fabulous thing. Fuel economy, if somebody wants to do the maths for me, it's currently doing 5 kilometres per litre. I'll do it afterwards and I'll put it up here. Bing! So not stellar, but it's drinking the right fuel. Because of that, it also means this is going to be, don't quote me on this, ULEZ compliant. As it's an import, it's worth checking. Theoretically, anything post 2006 and petrol should qualify, but do make certain that is the case. The rear-wheel drive bit also means you get this nice shove in the back, and should you want to, when the roads are a little bit greasy and damp and at low speeds with appropriate visibility, you can even play with the rear end too, though I haven't dabbled with that today. The auto box, when left to its own devices, is decent enough. You have both a regular auto mode, sport, and you can also shift manually too. When you want to do that, which unfortunately you have to do with the lever, it's sort of modestly responsive, akin really to an old school 5 or 6 speed torque converter, so it'll do it, but it's not instant. However, the pace you can carry with this thing is superb. I've absolutely no complaints, and even the ride starts to make a lot of sense when you do begin to pile on the miles. The brake pedal has a little more travel in it than you might expect, but once they bite, they do a fairly good job of bringing the car to a halt. In the bends, the chassis still stays relatively flat, but with just enough lean that you do get a vague sense of what you're asking from it. If I were to criticise the car, I would say that on occasion the steering does feel needlessly quick, and like you do run the risk of occasionally upsetting the chassis. The car also doesn't feel too big on these roads. The FX certainly was a little bit daunting because it's a fairly broad-shouldered thing. This feels a little more at home here. My only gripe thus far is that the lane keep assist is a fairly frequent companion, and I'm not entirely sure how to turn it off. I thought it was the button down here, but I don't think that it is. Oh, and of course the indicators are on the right, as you would expect them to be for anything Japanese. Let's test the turning circle, shall we? Being rear-wheel drive, I've got reasonably high hopes, but they were apparently misplaced. Not great. There is a reversing camera. There's also a camera integrated into the wing mirror over there, though I'm not entirely sure how to get it to do anything. What I'm also impressed with is just how nice this car really feels. I know the Infiniti was also designed to be a more upmarket thing. However, even this is not actually all that bad when you consider it's a 14-year-old entry-level version. There were just 4 of this car. You had the base 2-wheel drive, which is this, then a 4-wheel drive variant of the same, and a premium trim, which you could have on either one of those. Even so, this doesn't feel particularly lacking. There's plenty of leather, some nice-ish sort of materials here. Okay, they're not particularly upmarket, but they do the job. You've got your typical, you know, it's actually quite soft, this stuff. So I want to say vinyl, and then you've got plenty of functions on the steering wheel, including radar-guided cruise. There is a little camera up here that we've not yet been able to deduce the purpose of. However, I wonder if it's maybe either for reading speed signs, that sort of thing. I don't really know. The radar detector we think is hidden in the bumper down there, and that certainly wouldn't be powered by a regular camera anyway. And you can even translate all of this stuff. Presently, Brad has it so that it looks like it's original. However, he has had the system converted so that it's now all in English. Should you want, you can then go a step further and have the buttons changed for about 100 to 150 quid, but he likes the original look. And if you really want the 14-year-old sat-nav to work, you can do that for about 800 quid. That's a bit more because it involves a hardware change. The displays down here then also do have a little bit of Japanese on them, but for the most part, you've still got all the information that you need. But why is it that I said this car could be the solution for the modern motorist? Well, that's because the modern motorist is a fairly confused character. And let's be honest here, for most people, the purchase of a car is not something that you do solo, it is a joint decision. And I'm not going to be as outmoded as to say, well, he's the petrol head and she's not. This is 2023 after all. No. Either can be the petrol head and either can be either, you know what I mean. However, your modern day car customer, depending on whether they're a petrol head or not, will want quite a few different things from a car. And I think this does a rather good job of striking a balance of all of them. First off, your petrol heady type person generally doesn't really want a crossover, but this is styled in a sort of sporty way that I think they might be able to get on board with it. The non-petrol head then tends to want something that is small but also big, and generally speaking they're fairly easily fooled into thinking something like this is a big car, which actually it is not. This is a good thing. Inside it's got just about enough space, and let's be honest here, most people that are absolutely convinced that they need a long wheelbase Range Rover would in fact do absolutely fine with this. On the school run, I think it'd be the perfect thing. You've got your visibility that people insist on having by being a little higher up. However, it's not too compromised in terms of your A, B and C pillars. Overall, it's actually pretty decent. Engine then, well, these days people do not want diesels. About 10 years ago, it was all that they wanted. So if you're trying to buy domestically and you want something sensible and a bit like this, generally speaking, it's going to be either a diesel, or if it's a petrol, it might be a top of the line one which has all the toys and drinks quite a bit, and you might not want that, or it'll be the entry level one that people bought just because it was cheap, and you might not want that either. This strikes a nice balance. It's a meaty engine with a bit of go in it, but around town and to drive gently, it's perfectly sensible, nice, and has plenty of go in it should you want to get out of a junction in a hurry. My experience also of people that generally aren't that fussed about having power in a car, when they then drive one that's got some, do tend to appreciate it. The badge also is one that nobody is going to give you grief for. Nobody's going to say, "Ooh, you've got a Nissan, have you?" But if you've got some petrol heady mates and they say, "So what are you driving?" you say, "I got the Skyline," they don't have to know either. You also, should you want it, can get this in all-wheel drive, so if you happen to live somewhere where people want an SUV not just for the looks, well, it should be semi-capable, and Nissan do have considerable experience when it comes to making off-roaders. I'm not going to claim for even a second that this is going to be just as good as a Discovery, but I'm fairly sure with the appropriate rubber, it will at least get you out your driveway when conditions are against you. Should that not be necessary though, the petrol head of the pair can buy the two-wheel drive version, safe in the knowledge it's powering the correct wheels and not those ones. The other, they don't need to know that. Gripes that I have, well, this one doesn't have a sunroof, which was an option. The interior also, for me, is just a little tighter on space than I would really like. But if you want something a little bigger, you could get the Infiniti FX, which I have to say is also a real surprise. I love that car a lot more than I thought I was going to. And it does help that you could also get it with a 5-litre V8. Which you couldn't here. The Infiniti equivalent you could have with either the 3.7 we've got here, a 3.5 version of the same engine, or a 3-litre diesel, which I expect is the popular choice for many people here, but now about the last thing you want to buy. It's an okay engine, it's not great, it's not terrible. This though is quite charming. Put an exhaust on it too, and it'll sound fairly decent. So then, what would you be paying for one of these? Well, that is the issue. Because this is such a weird, oddball car that I can't really think many people would actually go to the trouble of importing, there aren't actually any out there for sale. You can pick up the EX, but the fact is, most of those aren't a direct equivalent to this because they got the diesel. The FX though, I know you can get for about similar money to Brad is going to be asking for this, which is £10,000. And that's a, I suppose, slightly more mainstream car, but any Infiniti is an oddball here in Britain, and I suspect a lot of other places around the world too. This is one step further on. I mean, it's just bizarre. Apparently, quite a few of them do get imported with people having put Infiniti badges on them, because even in Japan, they're embarrassed by the Nissan one for some reason or another. Their former CEO's antics might have something to do with that, but I'm not entirely certain. If most of the driving you're going to do is urban and the size of a car is important, or to put it another way, you don't want something that's massive, this I think is going to be a better choice than the FX, though I, as the nutty petrolhead, would probably get that, provided it's with the V8. Please don't take that to mean, though, that this car plays second fiddle, because the fact is, it doesn't. It's a really quite alluring combination of different characteristics, and when Brad offered it to me, I looked at it, as you may have done when you saw the thumbnail of this video, and just went, what is that? Why is that? Who wants that? I mean, what's the point? But now, having sampled it, I think actually of all of the 370 or Skyline variants I've driven, this is the one I'm actually most taken with. It's quite fun. Perfect? No. But interesting? Yes. And when it comes to Japanese oddball stuff, that I think is the most important thing. So then, I want to say as ever, a big thank you to Brad for bringing his car out, and of course to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.